Explore the history, relationships, expertise, and data that go into ensuring Stine growers get maximum yield potential. This is the Stine Seedcast. Here's your host, David Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. Today, our guest on the Seedcast is Tom Larson, Director of Agronomy for Stine. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me.
Well, so Tom's been a guest on the Seedcast before, and he leads our group of expert agronomists who are tasked with supporting our sales force and our grower customers all across the country. This time of year, one question that gets brought up is whether or not we need to replant a crop. Today, Tom's going to discuss what to do and what not to do when the topic of replant enters the conversation. So let's get started. Well, so Tom, you've been a guest on the Seedcast before, but as I always do, I like to kind of give a little bit of background, maybe give us a brief background of your history in ag and with the company.
Yeah, so I have a degree in ag business from Iowa State, and I've been in the ag industry for over 33 years. The first 12 years was spent in research where I evaluated seed and chem performance. Spent 18 years after that in the seed selling world. And then the last 3 years I've been with Stine, the first as a technical agronomist, and then the last couple of years as the director of agronomy.
And so now you have a team of agronomists. You have, as you said, some field agronomists, and you have technical agronomists. How many total agronomist staff?
Right. So on the field agronomy side, I have 5. And so those field agronomists are more concentrated in their area. And so we have them strategically placed to be on the spot, to be in the field taking notes in a smaller geography. And then I have 4 technical agronomists, technically 5, if I count Tyler Dubé as my soybean technical agronomist. And those technical agronomists cover larger areas, typically have a little more expertise and a wider area to cover.
So as we're sitting here today, in May, planting is in full swing. Some places it's getting wound down. Some places still going on. So I guess from your perspective in talking with all of your agronomy across our whole area, what are general trends that you're seeing so far?
The season has been unique. We started off the year, especially in the Stine core footprint of the upper Midwest, primarily where we had a warm spring, a very warm spring, March going into April, which led to a lot of tillage that was wrapped up prior to April. A lot of anhydrous was being applied, and everybody was really ready to start the season right at that crop insurance date. And there was a lot of crop that did go in the ground right away, but there was this fear that we were going to have this significant drop in temperatures, and so it held some people back, and the soil conditions were fantastic. But that fear, that unknown of how will that affect the germination of the crop, dropping that soil temperature to below 50 degrees, which is optimal for germination. So some guys went, some guys didn't. We did have the cold spell, and then we had a short window in the third week of April, first part of that third week, where a lot of seed went in the ground, and now we're rained out again. So now we sit idle in most of the Midwest, sitting here today talking to you.
Yeah, and kind of what you said just brings me around to what I always think about planting. Somebody one time said you only get one chance to do it right the first time. And probably planting is the perfect example of that. Unfortunately, sometimes things don't work out, and then we have to go to plan B, and sometimes that involves replant. And the reason I had you on, I want to talk about that, is because it seems to me that by its very nature, replant conversations occur at a time when emotions are high,
Correct.
Situations are difficult, for whatever the reason, whether it's weather or whether it's other issues. And so it seems to me like that's a very big decision to be making, and you need to be thinking about that. So I guess leading into my question, what are the decisions that growers need to consider as they decide whether or not to replant on their particular situation?
Right. And it's a good question. And it's not an easy question to answer, but absolutely, you touched on it. The first thing to do is take the emotion out of the decision, and let's look at it from an analytical standpoint. Let's go out and see what we're dealing with before we make any sort of preconceived notion of what we need to do. And I really there's a checklist that I go through, and I say there's 6 steps that I like to look at before when considering replant. And the first thing I do is, it's quite simply determine the plant population. And after that, let's look at that plant health. After the health, how even is this stand? We might have a population that's acceptable, but then when you dive into it, and you start looking at the spacing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. How even are those seeds placed out in the field? And then I like to compare the yields. And let's what do I mean by that is let's look at where we're at today versus what will I get later if I do a replant. We always have to consider replanting costs as well, and then at the end, what are all the other risks we've got this seed, we've got this stand that we're concerned about, but should I tear it up? Or should I just try to spike into it? And so that if we go through the checklist, it really helps take that emotion out of it. So the first thing I talked about was population. Real simply, I like to just go out and take random samples and not in one spot, but all over the field. And the standard for me is take that 1/1000th of an acre, which on a 30-inch row is 17 and a half feet, and just count the plants. Find out what was your goal. What were you shooting for a population when this field was planted? And a lot of times they'll look at that and say, oh, I guess it's not as bad as I thought, or we need to go to step 2 because our population isn't there. So that's the first step. And in determining that, let's get our hands dirty. We're agronomists, so we're happiest when we have dirt under our fingernails. So let's start digging in that row and see, okay, was the seed placed there originally, or was it a mechanical failure? Which we have to build this story, figure out what happened. And so is the seed there? And if the seed is there, why didn't it germinate? So that leads to kind of a bunch of sub-questions to go to. But after we determine the plant population, let's look at the plant health. What does the seed look like? There's a lot of acres that are planted right now, but they're underwater. And with these recent rains that we've had, how are those plants going to come out of that? How are they going to germinate and grow through that? Another thing is when I look at plant health and replant decisions, was it done as a result of a frost damage, for example? And so if it's frost, boy, it's the hardest thing in the world to do, but you have to give it time. You have to see how that plant responds. Now, corn can look real ugly for a while, and it'll come out of it because, again, of course, the growing point is below ground. And so when your growing point is below ground until about that V3, V4 stage, you can wilt that plant to the ground if it's at 2 leaves, and you're still going to be better off leaving it alone versus tearing it up and trying to replant. But again, you have to let that plant recover or see if it'll recover. And I have been in situations where people are worried about the new leaves getting tied up in the old dead tissue, and I've seen them use mechanical means, use their planter or a drag, and drive over these damaged plants, trying to remove that dead tissue to let the new tissue come through. And my response is, this plant is under stress, and you're just stressing it more. Right. So I have put my body in front of tractors before to stop these guys. Say, we're not following the steps here. Your emotion is running wild. So we need to make sure that we're looking at this and understanding. So frost can affect things in a different way. So you have to be a little bit patient. The next step, I look at that evenness of the stand and how are the seeds within that 1 foot or that 17 and a half foot, are they evenly spaced? Are we getting that picket fence, effect in the corn? We every plant, the the highest yield you can get in a cornfield is equidistance from with every seed from every seed. And so I don't think people are going to plant in 8.5-inch row spacings for corn, but whatever the row spacing is, we want to have that seed equal distance apart. And wet soils, if you're planting into wet soils, especially if they're a loam or a clay or typically a tighter soil, and you plant into that wet soil, you're really setting yourself up to have a lot of problems. Now, I know it's unavoidable in some cases, but when you're running that row cleaner or that disc opener through that wet soil, and you create either a sidewall compaction, or you can actually create a void in that seed furrow where that seed to soil contact is compromised, and then we turn the water off, that seed can just lay there and it'll be a lazy plant at best. So we have to be so careful, when we're evaluating that stand. We're down there digging. Let's look and see, how tight is that sidewall? What were the conditions? The soil tells you the history. You just have to look for it. And then I compare the yields, and this can be a little bit confusing, but what is the stand that you have there today versus what happens if I tear this out and replant it? And let's just say in the example of corn, it's 3 to 4 weeks after your initial planting date. Universities, all land-grant universities, have done great studies on this, and I think the findings would surprise a lot of people. So if you have the magic number's 25%. If you have less than 25% of your stand affected, and you're 3 weeks down the road from planting, that stand stays. I wouldn't touch it. If you tear it up and now you plant a whole new stand, well, there's no guarantee that it's all going to emerge and you're going to even get back to the stand you currently have. But I've looked at a bunch of studies, as I do all the time, and it was surprising to me that in an instance in a research study that was done at a university with a 30% stand loss, they experienced 6 bushel reduction in yield. So yeah, it may look horrific initially, but again, if you plant it later, and then we'll go down that road of do we change hybrids and populations, but sure. Sometimes the best thing to do is to do nothing. So, and then the replant costs. What is that? And the costs of aren't just seed. Diesel fuel, running that equipment, the maintenance, the adding of the hours on your machinery. There's a real cost to that, and if you're going to be fair about this, you have to take that into consideration as well. And then the risk of replanting, like I talked about, will that new planting germinate and grow? Will it get to full maturity? Depending on did you change your hybrid out? So there are just so many different things to evaluate, rather than, well, I think I'm just going to replant today. No, we're gonna take some steps and we're gonna look into this.
You brought up a great point. I think in a lot of cases when we talk about replanting, the most obvious scenario that comes to mind is storm related, right?
Sure.
Water,
yes.
seed underwater.
Yep.
But there are other factors, right?
Sure.
Like you mentioned, frost. There's sometimes mechanical, sometimes chemical reasons for replanting. What of the various factors, what situation is sometimes the most difficult to code?
Oh, the uneven stand. The whole field uneven stand is the worst. When you're looking at this, I guess I'll call it uniformly uneven. It's a challenge because the very last thing that I would recommend is spiking in seed into an established stand, because it's next to impossible. Now, soybeans, and we talk about water, and if you have potholes that drowned out,
sure,
you can take your planter out there and you can fill in those potholes, and then at harvest, sure, you can drive around those potholes and then go back and harvest later. But corn is kind of that commitment endrow to endrow. So if you're out there spiking in some additional seed, in areas, just raising and lowering that planter as you're driving up and down the field, typically what happens is you might have 5% achieve that optimum population, but in a lot of the cases, you could double that population, because those plants that you don't think are making it turn around, do make it, and now you've doubled that population. So you're going to hurt your yield. You're going to hurt the stand. You could create quite a mess. And it's not uniform across the field where, that matches the width of the planter. So as you're going along and you're dropping it and picking it up, you can create so much more damage than if you had just stayed out of that field to begin with. I'm guilty of doing it myself. and so,
from experience.
I guess I know from experience, but you think, well, I can just drop it, pick it up, and I'll adjust my maturity and it'll all be perfect. And I've made the biggest messes out there. So that to me, it's you're either all in replanting it, or in the instance of corn, you're going to live with what you have, because it can create quite a nightmare. And that comes back to that emotional decision, right? And then, it kind of goes down that road of maturities. Oh, crap, now what do I do? I've got to replant. And so say we make the decision that we're replanting a field. And on corn and soybeans both, if you're within a few weeks of your original planting date, and that original planting date was your optimum start date, then stay with that maturity. Don't start swapping out the maturity for something extremely earlier, because in a lot of cases, when you take a hybrid, for example, that was designed to be 3 zones north of you, and you bring it down into your zone, typically it won't act the way you expect it to. One of the characteristics most of the time is it gets real growthy, and you'll be very disappointed with the performance. Now, there's outliers and there's hybrids and or varieties that do work, but it's a rare case. So try to stay as close as you can to your original maturity. And, on the soybean side, again, some guys will argue that you should go later on maturity because they're a light-driven plant. Mm-hmm. Some will say you need to go earlier. I'm indifferent. I tend to go a little bit earlier. But I would say on the soybean side that population, I would probably even ratchet it up a little bit. And if you have the ability to plant in a narrower row configuration, that would be advantageous as well for multiple reasons. You're trying to get as much plant material out there as you can, so to try and get the best yield. But then you're also trying to get that quick canopy, because the weeds are wanting to grow too. And so if we can get a quicker canopy with a narrower row on those soybeans and shade out those weeds, it would be great. But not everybody has that option to go to a narrower row soybean.
So along those lines, I guess the next part I wanted to bring up was talking about, we kind of hit on, corn replanted to corn, soybeans replanted to soybeans. There's another scenario here, which is, in our world, which is, changing crops, right? And it was typically, for many years, you planted corn first and soybeans second. Now, that's not always the case anymore, as we know, but still, I would say the most typical scenario, if you're going to change a crop, is you're taking corn that you're having to replant and replanting to soybeans. What are the unique factors and considerations of that scenario?
None of them good.
Okay. All right.
So you have to be so aware, assuming that the nitrogen has already been applied for the corn, which could really affect the soybean performance. And then depending on your fertility, how you fertilize your crops in a rotation, but it's also that chemical that's been put down. If you did a pre-emerge prior to planting for your cornfield, and you say, well, I didn't put any nitrogen down, but I put my pre-emerge down, and now I'm not able to get in, so I'm just going to switch to soybeans. Well, you have to be very careful to make sure that there wasn't a compound applied that would prevent soybeans from germinating. And so there are a lot of herbicides out there that would prevent soybeans from being successful if you tried that scenario. And then your crop rotation, there's a lot of factors to say, well, I can't get my corn in, so I'm just going to switch to beans, that you really have to look at. And on the corn side, if you are getting getting later, one of the you could go to a little bit earlier and then back the population off just a little bit. 5 to 10% is really what I would recommend. But you have to keep in mind, and sometimes we're so driven, we're going to put the crop in at all costs, that we don't take consideration of, well, if the growing season ends on the 15th of October, for example, are you prepared to have that crop be terminated by a killing frost? If it's not physiologically mature, the grain quality is going to suffer, which then is going to lead to a lot of other challenges. So these factors all build up, and I have seen late planted corn, which then pushes back the post-application of the herbicide, which then affects the soybeans the following year, because we have this window of that these herbicides stay active in the soil, and sometimes it's pretty tight, and if you delay that application even a month, you could really be screwing up your rotation not only this year but next year. And running into some challenges that you're not even aware of. So you really have to read the label. You really understand what those chemicals are, what group of chemical they are, and how they affect, if you have the worst case scenario where you have to, say, pull the plug on your corn planting and switch to soybeans.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because like you said, if you have a late post application that is later than typical.
Yes.
And now let's say you've got an 8 or a 9 month plant back restriction on that chemistry, and then Mother Nature doesn't do anything to help you, break down that chemistry. It could be 10 months, or it could be, and now all of a sudden, like you said, you're planting into soil that still has residual, right?
Well, it's ironic, because that's exactly the scenario that we were running into last year. And it was driven by drought more so than excess moisture. But the lack of moisture actually delayed the breakdown of the chemistry in some cases, which then last year caused reduced stands in soybean fields in a corn-soy rotation. And so there's a lot of factors that have to be considered before you make a decision.
So one other thing I was going to ask you about is, I think generally there's been a trend over the last few years, at least exploration of reduced planting population on soybeans, at least from where they were historically, maybe 15, 20 years ago or whatever. How does that factor into the decision now? Because how big a difference does it make? Because it would seem to me you just have a little tightrope to walk when you put less out there to start with, or is that not correct?
No, the trend absolutely has been reduced populations in soybeans. I did some studies 20 years ago, and I can bore you to death with those findings, but the trend even 20 years ago was to a reduced planting population. And I'll approach it this way. As you're making your decision to manage your farm, and you're looking at the population, and you're looking at it and saying, well, recently the standard has been 140,000 seeds per acre of soybeans in a 30-inch row. That's kind of coming under fire a little bit, and guys are starting to play around with a little bit less of a planting population, but they're putting seed treatments on those soybeans to either ward off any sort of issues that they have in that soil, or as just an insurance policy to say, I'm going to plant at a reduced population, but I am going to put the seed treatment on to make sure that I'm giving that seed every opportunity to grow. My dad would say, well, you've got to plant 10 seeds per foot, because one seed's going to die to hail, one seed is going to die to crusting, and two seeds are going to die because of insects. And so then he gets his final stand. Well, today we're not going to take that approach in most cases. Today we're going to give every seed that opportunity to be as successful as that genetics will allow it. So then when you switch gears, and I always say when you're planting soybeans, I want to see them again in a week. Which means plant them, and ideally they're back up in a week, to minimize that stress. Again, soybeans growing point, once the soybeans emerge, growing point's above ground. And so I want to give this plant every opportunity to flourish. Now, I know that's utopia and that doesn't always happen.
Sure.
But so many times if we're making the decision, we spend 11 months planning out how we're going to do this. But the first time around. But the second time around, there's guys that just throw it all into the wind and say, I'm just going to go throw seed in the ground. And so, if you use a treated seed the first time, why wouldn't you use treated seed the second time? I get there's a cost factor, but I want more vegetative growth. So I would say you don't skimp on the population, and you really got to get everything in the ground and get it up and going. And if seed treatment is something that you feel gives that seed more vigor and gives it a faster emergence, then I would certainly look into getting even the replant seeds treated.
Okay. So from the conversation, I think what we can agree is that when it comes to replant, so many situations are unique in their own right, and everything has to be considered on its merits. But I guess I was going to ask you, is there a common thread there under which is there a situation where you just generally advise a grower, I don't think you want to replant in this case?
So again, it's that overall stand evaluation. And again, we get to the field driveway, let's leave our emotions in the pickup, and let's go out and let's just look. And this could be a time-consuming process because we're not going to walk 50 feet into the field and make an evaluation or determination based on one observation. So often we'll do the 60-mile-an-hour agronomy tour, right? We drive by a field at 60 miles an hour and say, well, this is what I see. We can't do that.
Right.
So it's like, we're going to walk here, we're going to walk over there, we're going to look at all the soil types, and we're going to really evaluate what's going on before we make a decision. I've seen great fields tore up, and I've seen fields that should have been replanted left. So it's all over the board. But at the end of the day, you have to scout. You have to spend the time out there, and you have to know what's going on in your fields to make any sort of decision. And we've got great sales teams, members that will call your salesperson. Say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on. I've got some seed out there. Can you got some time today to come out and look at it? And they'll say, sure, let's go look at it. Boy, I don't know. This doesn't look good to me either, So we better get the agronomist involved, and let's thank goodness that I have the team I have with the amount of people I have, so we can be there pretty quickly, and help you make those evaluations. But I would start with your salesperson, and if you have any questions at all, bring them out. But hopefully you're out there too as the farmer and making your observations and looking at that emergence, and farmers know their fields.
Yeah.
So if they know those trouble spots where they might run into an issue, or I thought the field was great when I planted it, and oops, it got a little sticky over on that south side, So I'm going to go out there and look and make sure that everything is where I want it to be.
Well, Tom, so besides helping our customers understand, whether to replant or not to replant, your team has a million things going on. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what is it that the agronomy department is doing right now that you're excited about for 2024?
Yeah, 2024 growing season is terribly exciting for me. I couldn't be more optimistic about the training that we'll be doing this summer. We have implemented our plot program. We changed it last year. We call it the product development plots now. And really the focus of our product development plots, last year we started as corn. This year we have corn and soybeans. And so my team kind of grumbled a little bit, and they said, well, we were busy last year, but now you doubled our workload this year. And I said, yep, and I'll probably keep pushing until we get to a point where you just can't physically do anymore. Then I'll pull it back a little bit. But I'm really not that bad of a person, I don't think. But these product development plots give us an opportunity, and our sales force and even our customers, to go out and look at what it is we're evaluating for new products and why we're excited about those new products. Majority of what we're looking at is what I call pre-commercial. So they're not in the catalog yet, but they have made it through and very could still be within our Stine Elite testing program where, and again, side note for the research people, the amount of research that's done at the small plot level is second to none. And I really mean that. It is second to none in terms of research in the ag world. Just some fun numbers. We'll have over 1.4 million soybean plots in Elite this year. We'll have over 1.1 million corn plots in Elite this year. No other company is coming close to those numbers. So when it comes to research, we lead the pack. And so I'm excited when these products make it through the research, and then they say, okay, here's some products that we're looking at that we're looking to bring to the catalog to the farmer, and so we'll plant them in strip trials throughout our footprint. So wherever you see a Stine field sign, that's our footprint. And we were tasked with the challenge of having a set number of these product development plots out there. And really the goal was each sales region have a corn and a soybean product development plot within the sales region, not only to give us data on performance in every region, but also to make it convenient for the customer, for the salesman to come in and learn about these new products and build that confidence around those new products before we're selling them. We try to keep it to, on the corn side, we try to keep it to 12 entries per location. But again, we some more products throughout the spring really rose to the top, and we decided last minute to add them. And so some of our plots and some of our maturities, we might have 15, 16 entries on the corn side. But that's nothing compared to the soybeans. Obviously, Stine is the leader in soybeans in the world, and I'm proud to say that that's the case. But we start looking at soybeans, and we have so much material to look at. I had one of the technical agronomists call me the other night, and he says, well, I just put a plot in western Iowa, a soybean product development plot. I said, that's great. He said it had 41 entries. It was a killer. But we had to have the maturities that customer, that area supported. And so not all of our plots are going to be 40 entries in size.
Right.
We're trying, we're trying to keep it in that 15 or so, plus or minus. But again, having that opportunity to get eyes on products in a real world, I guess I'll use it, strip trial event out in the field where you just get a good comfort level around performance expectations prior to the next selling year, I think is vital for success. So giving that first look. So those product development plots are key, and that takes a majority of our time. But that's not the only thing we're doing. So I'll just so we're also, we just wrapped up a 2-year study on seed treatments for corn. And what we learned was the variability out there was so vast that we couldn't get any continuity or consistency with the events that we were trying and testing. But keep in mind that your seed corn comes pre-treated anyway, and so trying to find something that really would spike that and get uniform performance above and beyond what our original seed treatment is we just didn't see that consistency. And so my team thought, great, we're done treating seed. And I said, you're right, we're done treating corn seed. But we transitioned into we're doing some soybean seed treatments now. And this world is changing rapidly. So in the past, there was a lot of products on the marketplace, but if you looked at the active ingredients, there was some real common ground between the active ingredients. And so you either had a fungicide or you had an insecticide, or you bundled them together and you had both. You had a fungicide and an insecticide, or an F&I as we call it. And that was about it. And depending on your situation, guys would adopted to treating the fungicide right away. And the insecticide, there's cases where it does make sense. And some guys just said, nope, I'm going to give that seed every opportunity. I'm going to put it all on. But that's all we had. Yeah. And so that component is, I hate the term no-brainer, but that component's a no-brainer. What we're seeing now is we're on the forefront of, I would say, biologicals 2.0. because there was some wild claims made with some products in the past that it would do this or do that without any data to back it up. But what we're seeing now is some real data on some real products that are showing performance in some of these real challenging soil conditions that we have. Soybean cyst nematode in particular. So we're looking at some of these seed treatments and adding them on to the end of our soybean product development plots. So everything within my soybean product development plot is an untreated seed, because that's how we truly evaluate the performance of the genetics. But my thought was, outside the perimeters of that plot, now we'll have the same genetics, the same varieties, but now we're going to evaluate a couple seed treatments and see how are they going to perform, for example, in a heavy SCN environment. Now, weather has a big factor into determining performance as well, but I am incredibly excited to see how these some of these seed treatments perform. The agronomists have pulled soil samples already from all the plots, so we have a really good idea not only on fertility but what's going on in that soil. So we have a comfort level around that. So the seed treatment component is going to be really fun, I think, to see. And it's not just SCN. We're evaluating in sudden death areas. And we have got some genetics that look amazing in sudden death. And so we've identified areas where sudden death can run rampant and really affect yield. And so we're doing some not only genetic testing, but some seed treatment testing in that environment as well. And then our good old friend, the white mold. So we're doing. There's been some very common treatments for white mold, met with various degrees of success, I'll say. And so what we're looking at doing is not only doing genetic testing, but also some seed treatment testing in that environment as well. So that's kind of exciting. And again, it's to me, it's just an add-on to what we're already doing, because where's the industry going? What are the opportunities out there to take the industry-leading germplasm and make it better? So if there's a product out there, I want to let's evaluate and just see what we see, and that data will be available in the fall as well, and we'll talk about it throughout the growing season if you have an opportunity to come out to one of our plots. So we're doing seed treatments, and then really that's our summer. We'll do multiple infield testing, and we have a spreadsheet where each corn hybrid is evaluated over 100 different times throughout the summer. Depending on what time of the growing season, how is it doing to this versus this or that, and so we have a checklist, so we're uniform. Soybeans aren't quite as aggressive, but the expectation is the agronomist is in that each plot minimum of at least every other week. So they'll spend a lot of time in field, we'll say, and then when they have free time, that will be spent doing training and bringing in the sales force and showing them multiple times throughout the growing season, this is what we're seeing today. Here's what we're excited about. Here's what you can expect. And again, at the end of the day, based on the number of varieties or hybrids in one of these product development plots, like on the corn side, we might advance 4 of them, or we might not advance any. It just depends, But we have to do our due diligence and see if we can find that next product, that next better thing. On the soybean side, we move at a very rapid rate, and so these soybeans our lines of soybeans right now are some of the best I've ever seen. So it's like asking me which one of my children I like the best, and the answer to that is depends on which day it is. But no, that's not true. But it's just building this confidence and building this and this understanding how these products perform, and then we will also later in the season, if you're in an area where silage is important to you, silage data, we are taking silage analysis on every one of our corn product development plots in areas where there's requests. So we will have that data available as well. We're not going to do it in an area where nobody is interested in it.
Sure.
It's a very labor-intensive process to do. But in those areas where that data is important to them, absolutely we'll provide that.
Well, Tom, as you've talked about here today, it's we're known for outstanding genetics, both in corn and soybeans. But what excites me is that your team is really tasked with helping us figure out how to deploy those genetics and help growers place them for the maximum benefit, maximum profit for them, right? So not only are providing the genetics, but now providing the resources and expertise to help them really make the most of those genetics in every way. So really appreciate the work that you and your team have put forth on that. So.
Yeah, we're the explosion. I don't use that term lightly, but the explosion of genetics that we're evaluating is fantastic because we have so many exciting products, both corn and soybeans, that we're looking at. That I'm already looking forward to fall. I can't wait because these products, looking at the lineage, how these products came about, and the performance that I'm expecting, it's going to be a fun growing season.
Awesome. Well, Tom, as always, great conversation. Appreciate all of the insights you provided us on the all-important question of to replant or not to replant, and great to catch up with you on what's going on in the agronomy department, and appreciate what you do.
Yeah, thanks for your time. It's great to be here.
Well, that's our time for today. I want to thank our guest and our listeners for joining us on another episode of the Stine Seedcast. We'll be back again soon with more expert interviews and insights about all things Stine. And if you have a question for our Stine experts, go ahead and send it to us at asktheseedcast@stineseed.com. That's asktheseedcast@stineseed.com. And to never miss an episode, subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found.
Subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found. To learn more about Stine and its elite corn and soybean genetics, visit stineseed.com. Stine has yield.